At some point, you've got to cut to the quick and ask yourself one of those true to myself questions. Why am I still explaining? Not to someone who misunderstood you or to someone who needs more context. Why are you still explaining yourself to someone who's already decided, whether it's with their inaction or with their dismissal, with their contempt, who heard you the first time and the second time and chose each time not to receive it? There is indeed a difference, and it matters, between someone who doesn't understand you and someone who doesn't want to. Because one is a gap you can close. There's conversations that can be had. There's give and take. There's the desire. The other one is a door. It's a door that was never actually opened. But here we are. We try again. We find better words, calm words, careful words. We switch up and change how we present the argument or our position within the conversation. We come at it from a different angle and hope that it hits home that time. But here's what I want to ask. What are you actually hoping for? And I mean that in the gentlest of ways. Because sometimes, not always, but sometimes what we're reaching for isn't really understanding. It's validation. It's someone in that circle, that family, or that relationship, or that familiar space finally saying, yeah, I see you. Or you are enough. You were right. And I'm not dismissing that need because it is real. And having that need doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. But it is worth being honest with yourself about it. Because when that wound is in the room, even unconsciously, it changes what you're actually doing when you go back and explain again. Because when that happens, you're not trying to be heard. You're asking for a specific person to hand you something specific. Something that might mean more coming from them than coming from someone else. And they have told you already in their actions or in their silence or in the pattern of how things always go with them that they can't or they won't or they don't. And that's the room you got to sit in. Not with judgment, with awareness. Because if it's understanding, you may have already learned that that's not coming from this person. It's just not. So then you ask, what keeps you in that loop? Sometimes it's love. This person could be family or a partner, someone whose opinion of you still holds some weight, even when it probably shouldn't hold as much as it does. And you keep explaining because somewhere underneath it all, you still want them to see you. For it to finally click and they really see you. Sometimes it's the belief that if you say it just right, precisely, clearly, they've got to understand. Logic will win and clarity will break through. But some folks can't be reached by logic. They can't because they're protected by their position. Their understanding of where you're coming from would require them to question something about themselves. And they've decided that they'd rather not. And there are those that would if they could. But the capacity isn't there for these individuals. And that has nothing to do with you. And it's not because of anything you said or anything you didn't say. They just don't have the container for what you're carrying. And that one hits a little different. Because you can't be angry at a ceiling for being a ceiling. But you also can't keep throwing yourself against and hoping that it'll become a door. And then there's the other side of this. That side of ourselves that shifts depending upon where we are. Because some of us, you can just walk into a room and you can command it. You can communicate clearly and hold your ground, know your worth. And then you go home or get on the phone or sit across from the table and you just shrink, explaining and justifying and hoping that someone will understand. Those familiar places are where the oldest wounds live. And the oldest wounds have the longest reach. So this isn't judgment. It's a recognition of the energy spent, of the words that went nowhere, of that version of you that keeps showing up to the conversation that the other person has already left. It's a tiredness. It's a tiredness that accumulates so slowly. It's like you almost need a time lapse camera to capture that. You don't even notice that it's left the building until, just one day you just realize you stopped looking for the right words. And it's not because you gave up, but it's because the well just quietly ran dry. All those moments you softened yourself to make the truth easier to receive and watch it get rejected anyway. All those moments you walked away wondering what was wrong with you when there was nothing wrong with you. You were just asking a closed door to open. And closed doors, no matter how many times you knock, they don't care. You are allowed to stop explaining. Not in anger, not in punishment, just as a true decision that your clarity deserves a better audience. Sit with yourself there and continue traveling.